My name is Ava, and what you're about to hear is the story of how I lost a family but found myself. It didn't happen overnight. It happened right here, under the glittering fairy lights of the annual Sterling Vines Harvest Gala in Napa Valley. The air smelled of oak, ripe grapes, and old money. My brother, Marcus, stood on the main stage, a crystal glass of our family's award-winning Cabernet Sauvignon held high. He was in his element, the golden sun, soaking in the applause as he toasted to a legacy he believed was his alone. He spoke of tradition, of family, of the sacred ground we stood on. I watched him from the shadows, a ghost at my own family's feast. Then, I started walking. I felt hundreds of eyes on me as I ascended the stage, my simple dress a stark contrast to the designer gowns around me. I took the spare microphone. Marcus's smile faltered. "Ava, what are you doing?" His voice was a tight whisper. I turned to the crowd, my heart a steady cold drum. "Thank you for those beautiful words, Marcus," I said, my voice clear and calm. "But before you all toast to legacy, I think you should know that as of tomorrow morning, the Sterling Vines brand, its land, and its entire portfolio will be acquired by a global competitor, a deal I personally brokered and signed this afternoon." The silence was absolute, a void where the cheerful music used to be. Every smiling face froze. Marcus stared at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. If you've ever felt like the invisible person in a room full of people who are supposed to love you, hit that like button, because you know the chilling satisfaction of finally being seen. To understand that moment, you have to understand the girl they tried to bury. That look on Marcus's face on stage. It wasn't new to me. It was the same look he'd given me my whole life, a mixture of confusion and contempt. You see, in the Sterling family, you were either in the wine business or you were a disappointment. There was no in-between. While Marcus was learning to distinguish a Merlot from a Malbec by the age of 10, I was collecting rocks. I wasn't interested in the fruit on the vine. I was fascinated by the earth that fed it. I studied geology. To my family, that was like announcing I wanted to be a professional thumb twiddler. The dirt girl. That's what they called me. At family dinners, while Marcus discussed market projections, my father would ask if I'd found any special pebbles that day, his voice dripping with condescension. My bedroom wasn't filled with fashion magazines. It was lined with geological maps and soil charts of Napa Valley. I could tell you why the grapes from the Western Ridge were more tannic, not because of the aging process, but because of the volcanic tuff in the soil. This knowledge was worthless to them. It was a party trick, a weird hobby. My passion was their punchline. I was the shadow that proved how brightly Marcus, the heir apparent, shone. They saw a girl playing with dirt, failing to see the woman who understood the very foundation of their empire better than they ever could. They built their house on that foundation, never once thinking the person they dismissed might just own the ground beneath their feet. It's evening here for me right now, and I wonder, have you ever been given a label by your family that just felt completely wrong? Tell me about it in the comments below. I'll be reading them tonight. Their biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my ambition. It was underestimating my obsession. That lifelong dismissal became their official policy on the cold Tuesday we buried my father. The funeral felt like a business merger. People in black suits shook Marcus's hand, offering condolences for his loss and congratulations on his inheritance in the same breath. The real blow, however, came a week later in a sterile, glass-walled lawyer's office overlooking San Francisco Bay. The air was thick with the scent of paper and greed. I sat there, clutching a worn geology hammer in my bag for comfort, as our family's lawyer, Mr. Gable, read my father's last will and testament, or rather, the new version of it, a version that had been amended just 3 months prior, when his health was rapidly declining. I listened in a state of numb disbelief as the words flowed out. To my son, Marcus Sterling, I bequeath my entire controlling interest in Sterling Vines, LLC, the family estate on Silverado Trail, and the full portfolio of associated assets. Marcus sat impassively, though I saw his wife, Chloe, squeeze his hand under the table, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. And to my daughter, Ava Sterling, I leave the sum of $100,000 and the deed to the northern parcel of undeveloped land, Plot 7B, Plot 7B. The rocky, 40-acre patch of land everyone called the Goat's Climb, because it was too steep and the soil too poor for even the hardiest vines. It was a parting gift of pocket change and a patch of dirt. After the lawyer left, Marcus walked over, placing a patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Take the money, Ava," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Go find your special rocks. This is a business, not a hobby." He didn't see the ice forming in my veins. He saw a girl who had just lost everything. He had no idea he had just given me the one thing I needed, a reason to burn his world to the ground. The days following the will reading were stranger than the event itself. The silence from Marcus was expected, but what I didn't anticipate was the assault of kindness from his wife, Chloe. Her campaign began with a text message, oozing with emojis I knew she'd never use in her real life. "Thinking of you, sweetie." "So brave." It was followed by phone calls, her voice dripping with a thick, syrupy pity that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Ava, honey," she'd sigh into the phone. "I know this is all so difficult to understand. Marcus and we just feel such a heavy responsibility to protect the legacy. It's a ruthless business, you know. We're doing this for the family." For the family. The words echoed in my empty apartment. A cruel joke. I was family, but I was not included in that we. The final insult arrived a week later. A large, ostentatious gift basket was delivered to my door. It wasn't filled with the premium Sterling Vines vintages that my father had perfected. Instead, it contained a bottle of cheap $2 sparkling cider, a block of generic cheddar cheese, and a box of stale crackers. Tucked inside was a card, handwritten by Chloe in a loopy, performative script. A little something to cheer you up. "We're all so proud of you for being so strong." It wasn't a peace offering. It was a victory lap. It was a carefully packaged message that said, "This is what we think you're worth now. This is your level." I didn't cry. I just stared at it, the cheap plastic wrap crinkling under my fingers. That basket was the second best gift they ever gave me. It clarified everything. Their cruelty wasn't an impulse. It was an art form they practiced with a smile. I want you to type a 1 in the comments if you've ever received an apology or a gift that felt more like an insult than a kindness. That cheap basket was the push I needed. The next morning, instead of throwing it in the trash, I threw my gear into my old Jeep and drove out to Plot 7B. The Goat's Climb. It lived up to its name. From the road, it looked like a broken spine of a hill, all sharp rocks and stubborn windswept scrub brush. The 40 acres of land my family had used as a punchline for decades. My father once joked you couldn't even grow regrets there. As I stepped out of the Jeep, the wind whipped my hair across my face. It felt desolate. It felt forgotten. To my family, this was a wasteland. But to me, it was a puzzle. I spent the entire day on that hill. I didn't see weeds. I saw indicator species that hinted at the mineral content below. I didn't see useless rocks. I saw exposed layers of shale and limestone that told a story millions of years old. I pulled out my hammer and cracked open a rock, revealing a core of volcanic tuff, porous and rich. I took soil samples from a dozen different spots, bagging and labeling them with a focus I hadn't felt in months. While Marcus was sitting in his plush office admiring his profit margins, I was on my hands and knees, my fingers deep in the earth. And that's when I saw it. The combination, the precise, almost impossible blend of clay, limestone, and volcanic soil. It was a disaster for growing the bold Cabernet grapes of Napa. But my heart started to pound because I knew, from years of studying geological maps, that this exact soil composition was almost identical to a tiny, revered sliver of land in Burgundy, France, a place famous for producing one of the rarest, most difficult, and most expensive Pinot Noir grapes in the world. They hadn't given me a wasteland. They had given me a lottery ticket. A geological survey is just data on a page. It's a theory. To turn it into a reality, I needed someone who spoke the language of both soil and wine, a translator. And in the world of wine, there was only one name that mattered: Jean-Pierre Dubois, a legendary vintner from Burgundy, a man who could supposedly tell you the year a wine was bottled just by its scent. He had retired years ago under a cloud of mystery, moving to a small, unassuming cottage in Sonoma, tired of the commercialization of his craft. Finding him was difficult. Getting him to listen was said to be impossible. But I had his old textbook from college, its pages worn and dog-eared, and I knew he was obsessed with one thing: terroir, the soul of the land. I showed up on his doorstep unannounced, clutching a binder full of my soil reports like a holy text. He answered the door himself, an old man with eyes as sharp and clear as Chablis. He looked at me, then at the binder, and scoffed. "Napa is for Cabernets and capitalists, little girl. I am retired." He began to close the door, but I didn't talk about grapes. I talked about dirt. "I'm not here about Cabernet," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm here about the calcareous clay and Kimmeridgian limestone on a north-facing slope with a 30-degree gradient." He stopped. His eyes narrowed. He recognized the language. I spent the next hour in his rustic study, not begging for help, but presenting my thesis. I laid out my maps, my data, my theory. He grilled me, asking about drainage, pH levels, microclimates. He was testing me. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was speaking my native tongue. Finally, he leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. He tapped my geological map with a single, knowing finger. "My dear girl," he said, his French accent curling around the words, "this is not a wasteland. This is a forgotten gold mine." Mr. Dubois's validation wasn't just a pat on the back. It was a key that unlocked a door I didn't even know existed. He made one phone call. A week later, I wasn't in a vineyard. I was in a high-rise glass tower in Zurich, sitting across from the executive board of Viridian Global, one of Europe's largest beverage conglomerates. They had been trying to break into the American prestige market for years, but they didn't want another generic Napa Cabernet. They wanted a story. They wanted something unique. I didn't show them a business plan. I showed them my geological maps. I told them a story about soil and time. They listened, and when I was done, the CEO, a sharp woman named Isabel, didn't offer to buy my land. She offered me a job. She said, "We don't want your land, Mrs. Sterling. We want your eyes. We want the way you see the ground." So I began to lead a double life. To my family in Napa, I was still just Ava, the quiet geologist, living in a small rental in Oakland, driving my 15-year-old car. They'd occasionally send me pity texts, asking if I needed money for groceries. They had no idea that on Tuesdays, I was taking red-eye flights to Oregon to scout land for a new line of sparkling wine, or that on Fridays, I was closing seven-figure deals in the Pacific Northwest. I became Viridian's ghost, their secret weapon. While Marcus was bragging about a 5% increase in tasting room sales, I was quietly directing a $150 million acquisition fund, building a silent empire of undervalued land right under his nose. Think about a major crossroads in your own life. If you had to choose between a safe path that made others happy and a risky one that was truly your own, which would you pick? Type safe or risky in the comments. I'm so curious to know. I let them believe I was a failure. It was the best camouflage I could have ever asked for. Having power is one thing. Knowing how to wield it is another. My work at Viridian wasn't just about land. It was a masterclass in corporate strategy. I spent my days reading the fine print, dissecting loan covenants, and finding leverage in 100-page contracts. The girl who used to read geological surveys for fun was now reading financial statements. One night, fueled by black coffee and a cold sense of curiosity, I decided to turn my professional skills toward my own past. I went online to the public county records and SEC filings, and I began to dig into the financial bedrock of Sterling Vines. Marcus had always been flashy, and I suspected his ambition outpaced his business sense. I was right. It took me 3 nights, but I found it buried deep in the filings for a $50 million expansion loan he'd taken out for a new, unnecessarily glamorous visitor center. He had leveraged everything, the land, the brand, the inventory, to secure the funds. He was stretched dangerously thin, and there, on page 78, was the clause. A little piece of boilerplate legal text that most people overlook. It was an acceleration covenant, a change of control provision. In plain English, it meant that if a direct competitor ever purchased this debt from the bank, that competitor had the right to call the entire $50 million loan due in full within 30 days. If it couldn't be paid, the collateral was forfeited. All of it. I stared at the screen, the legal jargon glowing in the dark of my apartment. He had used a piece of paper, the will, to write me out of my family. I had just found the piece of paper that would allow me to write myself back in. The perfect, legal, inescapable trap. It wasn't about geology anymore. It was about architecture, the architecture of a downfall. And that brings us back to the stage, under the warm Napa moon, with the scent of roasted almonds and betrayal in the air. Back to the silence that followed my announcement. It was a silence so profound you could hear a wine cork drop from 100 feet away. Marcus finally found his voice, a strangled, sputtering sound. You're joking," he stammered, his face pale under the stage lights. "This is a pathetic joke, Ava. You don't have that kind of power. You're a nobody." His wife, Chloe, rushed to his side, her hand on his arm, whispering frantically. I saw the local newspaper reporter in the third row start typing furiously into her phone. The show was just getting started. "It's not a joke, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the whispers of the crowd. I didn't raise it. I didn't have to. "The conglomerate I work for, Viridian Global, acquired your entire $50 million debt from the bank last Tuesday. We paid cash." A new wave of gasps rippled through the audience. I saw a few of his key investors shift uncomfortably in their seats. I continued, looking directly at him. "And according to Section 8.1 of the loan agreement you signed, that gives my employer the right to accelerate payment, all $50 million, due in 30 days. I let that hang in the air for a moment. "Or in this case," I added, my voice dropping to an icy calm, "to simply take possession of the collateral, the brand, the land, the legacy, our legacy." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see his weird little sister. He saw a predator. Now this is the question I have to ask you, watching this right now on this Saturday evening. Was this revenge, or was it justice? Let me know your honest opinion in the comments. Chloe, ever the performer, was the first to recover. She stepped forward, her hands clasped over her heart, tears welling in her perfectly made-up eyes. "Ava, how could you?" she cried, her voice projecting to the horrified crowd. "This is a betrayal of our father's memory. The will. The will was his final wish. He wanted to protect this family, and you're tearing it apart out of spite." It was a masterful performance. She was painting me as the bitter, vengeful daughter, desecrating a sacred last wish. She was trying to win the jury of public opinion. She should have known I came prepared for a trial. I gave a subtle nod to a man in a black polo shirt standing near the soundboard. He nodded back. The giant screen behind us, which had been displaying a romantic, looping video of the vineyards, flickered. The scenic view was replaced by the crisp, white background of an email. My email, which I had obtained through a legal discovery process during the acquisition. The crowd went silent as they read. It was from Chloe's personal account, sent to the family lawyer. The subject line was chillingly clear. Will amendment strategy. And the body was even worse. A sentence was highlighted in yellow for everyone to see. What's the most effective language to use to frame Ava's instability and lack of business acumen to convince him she isn't competent to manage her shares? I let the crowd read it. I let Marcus read it. Then I turned to Chloe, whose face had gone as white as a Sauvignon Blanc grape. "You were concerned about my competence, Chloe," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the entire valley. "You should have been more concerned about mine. This email is time-stamped 1 week before my father's final hospitalization. That wasn't his wish. That was a coup." There was no comeback from that email. The gala ended not with applause, but with the quiet, shuffling exodus of hundreds of guests trying not to stare. Chloe crumpled, her fake tears replaced by the real, ugly sobs of defeat. Marcus just stood there, a statue of a man whose world had just turned to dust. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings, but the outcome was never in doubt. Viridian Global absorbed Sterling Vines, as planned. We didn't destroy the brand. That would have been too simple. We repurposed it, and on the 40 acres of land they called the Goat's Climb, my 40 acres, we planted the Pinot Noir vines from Burgundy. Last fall, we released the first vintage. We called it Founder's Folly. It became the most talked about, critically acclaimed, and fastest selling wine in Napa history. And Marcus? Oh, I didn't fire him. That would have been a mercy. As a public gesture of goodwill, I offered him a position within the new company structure. He's now the junior regional sales representative for Northern California. If you walk into a Safeway or a Costco on a Saturday afternoon, you might just see him. He'll be the man in the ill-fitting suit, standing behind a flimsy plastic table, pouring tiny paper cups of Founder's Folly for shoppers. His job is to tell them the marketing story we wrote for him. He has to smile and talk about the once overlooked parcel of land, the hidden gem, the visionary discovery. He has to recite the story of his own monumental failure over and over just to make his commission. He's not selling wine. He's selling his humiliation, one plastic cup at a time. He has to drink the bitter harvest of his own arrogance, every single day. So, where am I now? I'm not on a stage, and I'm not in a boardroom. I'm right here, walking through the rows of Pinot Noir vines on the 40 acres they threw away. The sun is setting over the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The wind that once felt so desolate now just feels like a whisper, carrying the scent of my own success. I can hear the evening cicadas starting their song. It's quiet here. It's peaceful. And it's all mine. They laughed at me because I loved the dirt, but they never understood that you can't build anything lasting without understanding the ground you're standing on. My story isn't really about wine or money. It's about what I learned standing on that ground. First, your greatest strength is almost always hidden inside the very thing people make fun of you for. Your weird hobby, your useless obsession. That's not your weakness. That's your superpower in disguise. Don't ever let anyone devalue it. Second, true legacy isn't something that's handed to you. It's something you build, seed by seed. Stop fighting for a seat at someone else's table and go build your own. And finally, the best revenge isn't loud and destructive. It's quiet, creative, and fulfilling. It's building a life so beautiful and a success so complete that the noise from your past becomes completely irrelevant. It's Saturday night here in Hanoi as I record this for you, and I want to leave you with this thought. If you believe in the power to be the architect of your own life, to turn forgotten ground into your own vineyard, then subscribe to this channel. It's not just a click, it's a commitment to your own story of becoming. Because we all have a patch of worthless ground just waiting for us to see its potential.